Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Jones. I'm with the University of Arizona, Gila County Cooperative Extension, and I'm pleased to have with us today Jan Groth to talk about how to prune a tree. I know we've had a little difficulty getting this going, but it meant rain and snow for Arizona, so I think whatever that takes, we are happy to sacrifice so we can get rain and snow here. As I just mentioned, I've got Jan Groth to talk about how to prune a tree. This is our Garden and Country Extension webinar series. It is a weekly Zoom webinar. It's 60 minutes or less, Thursdays at 11. It features a variety of horticultural and natural resource topics relevant to environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County, Arizona, and beyond. The recordings will be posted at our University of Arizona Cooperative Extension YouTube channel. So if you put in Arizona Cooperative Extension YouTube, you can find these. And I want to remind you all that the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. Here's our agenda for today. Thank you for everybody who's gotten in and logged on. I am Chris Jones, I'm your moderator. We have with us today Jan Groth to talk about how to prune a tree. She'll give about a half-hour presentation, and then we'll have time for our question and answer discussion with Jan. You can put your questions into the Q&A or the chat box, and I'll feed those to Jan, and she'll respond to those as best she can. And we'll seek to finish up here by noon so we can get off to lunch. Here is our speaker. This is Jan Groth. She's the Master Gardener, Instructor, and Coordinator for Cochise County Cooperative Extension for the University of Arizona and Sierra Vista. And with that, Jan, I'm going to give you the screen and the microphone, and you are set to go.
All right. Good morning, everybody. The very first thing I have to do is thank Chris and thank all of you who have tried to come to this for the last 2 weeks for your patience and your tenacity and your perseverance in returning today. I've lived in this home for 17 years. I have only ever lost my internet one time in the past when we had a huge storm. So 2 weeks ago, we had a windy, pummeling rain that lasted a good 8 hours. Wonderful for the ground, but somehow with that much moisture, we lost our internet, as did our entire neighborhood. So then last week, we had that glorious snow. Here where I live I live in a little box canyon actually. And so we ended up with 10 to 12 inches of snow everywhere. We ended up with ice on the wires, icicles hanging from our house. And again, the night before it started acting up, and the next morning the internet was gone, as was our cable television and everything. And it was all gone for about 30 hours. We didn't get anything back until Wednesday morning. So I really thank you all so much, and thank you for understanding. But man, all that moisture was fabulous. So today we're going to talk about pruning a deciduous tree. Totally different topic than pruning fruit trees or pruning a palm tree. Or pruning conifers. Conifers are your trees which produce cones. So those are all kind of a different topic. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. I could make this a 2-hour talk, Chris. And so when you say she's going to get through this in 30 minutes, that's challenging. So bottom line, I think a lot of people think, oh, it's wintertime, it's time to prune. And everybody thinks, there are a lot of folks that think you have to prune a deciduous tree yearly like you do a fruit tree. Two totally different topics. In fruit trees, you're pruning for shape, you're pruning for fruit production, and you're pruning for health of that tree. In an ornamental shade tree, you don't have to prune that tree every year. You should examine it and review it every year, but you should not have to prune it if it's kind of cared for through the whole time. So let's talk about why you would prune it. There are just a few spots where you would want to. Number one, if it's diseased. Well, let's go back. You want to look at the tree for anything dead. Take off any dead branches that you see. That's the first thing you want to look for. Then you want to look for any diseased branches. And so those are the branches then you would like to take off. Then you want to look for wayward branches. When I say wayward, that means branches that are cutting through the middle of a tree and perhaps rubbing on another branch. When limbs and branches rub on one another, especially as they get larger and in windstorms, they will literally rub the bark off the tree and damage it and leave a lesion. Another example of wayward is you've got a limb that's all of a sudden taken off in the wrong direction, is maybe crossing a sidewalk or maybe into a street. Now you're looking at a safety issue. So wayward can lead to safety issues. And that's when you want to take those branches off. Wayward could mean that you have suckers growing out of the bottom of the tree. And we'll talk about suckers in a minute. I've got a few pictures of those. Suckers are the abnormal random growth that come out from underneath the bottom of the tree, or many times from the sides of the trunks. Other wayward growth are water sprouts. We'll have pictures of those. Water sprouts are the sprouts that shoot straight up from a branch. Many times those respond to either odd, uneven watering. More often they respond to trauma of some sort, especially pruning them, over pruning them incorrectly, pruning them the wrong time of year, that sort of thing. So okay, and a fourth reason you might want to prune is if you want to thin your tree out. Maybe you have a very thick tree. Some of the trees that I see commonly that get really thick, some mesquites get very thick, some Chinese pistachios get very thick, and they're gorgeous, but you might want to thin it because number one, if it's so thick and massive in its crown, it doesn't let the air circulate well. When you don't have good air circulation, you can bring in disease and pests. You also might want to open it up maybe for a little sunlight. Maybe the center of your tree is starting to get a little thinned out because it's not getting proper sunlight. A third reason, if you live in a real wind belt, like many of us do, if the tree is very, very massive in the top, sometimes it acts resistant to the wind and the wind pushes against it, moving that tree, especially if it's a younger tree and it's not real well rooted. So if you thin it out just slightly, then the wind can pass through it and not disturb the root system. So we've talked about you want to prune dead or diseased, anything that's broken. I don't know about any of y'all, but through this wind and through the snow that we've had, we've experienced a lot of broken branches at our place, and you can find them all the times. You can find them in parking lots as cars back into the trees. You can find them on your property if animals have gone and climbed or broken them or whatever. But anytime you have a break in a branch, cut that whole branch off. And we're going to talk about cutting anything off back at the origin. We'll have pictures of that too. Don't just cut it right at the break. You want to take that limb off back at the origin. Broken pieces are open and raggedy, and anytime you have a ragged open place on it in a branch, that is invitation for pests to lay eggs and disease to set in. Fungal spores get in there, and while you might not see it immediately, those are the kinds of things that can happen. So dead, diseased, broken, wayward, thinning. And then if you've got a very young tree that shows that it's going to do some crazy growth, like crossing through the middle, train your young tree at first. Don't wait until the tree's grown for 2 or 3 years, because then trying to get some of those wayward branches off might be more traumatic for the tree. But we're going to talk also about don't put a tree in the ground and immediately start trimming the lower branches off. We'll get to that in the PowerPoint as well. All right, so when you are pruning a deciduous shade tree, if you've examined that you're going to need to do this, you want to know that it's an art and a skill. It's an art because you want to enhance its form and you want to enhance its health, and it's a skill because you want to make the proper prunes, because improper prunes can absolutely damage your tree, destroy its form. Damage can bring on the onset of disease and pest infestation. So why don't we just start right now? And let's just go straight to the PowerPoint. We can start looking at some photos. All right, Chris, here comes my trick. Where am I going to find it? You've got me on, I shared the screen earlier.
So go into your share screen. You think you got it?
Okay, let me just do that. Okay, and I'm going to warn y'all right up front, I am not a technological princess. So bear with me while we get through the PowerPoint. All right, so let's start with a beautiful.
Okay, it did not come up.
Oh, it did not.
So let's
go back to this maybe.
So click on that green button, find the one that says your show, and then hit share.
Hang on, I'm going to escape. I'm going to try to get out of the PowerPoint. Let's do this. I'm trying to get, all right, let's do this. Are we there?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
now we're
all
talking.
right. Now, I thought I had left it up and shared with you when we did our test.
Yeah, no, it tends to always have to start over.
There we go. Okay, do you see it? Do you see the mesquite tree?
Look great. This is it.
Okay,
We're
wonderful.
good to go.
All right, so this mesquite tree to me is just beautiful. It has been properly trained as it has grown. It doesn't have any, see, and my computer is a touch. So the minute I touch it randomly, everything changes. All right, so you can see that there are no random crossing branches that you see. You can see there are no suckers, there are no water sprouts. The trunks are clean and beautiful. They've been trimmed up just far enough to show off that beautiful multi-trunk form that it's developing. It's also been thinned very slightly. You see how you can see blue sky through it? So the tree doesn't look thin. It doesn't look sick. It looks very healthy and lush, but you can see a little airspace through it. So when those heavy winds come, they can pass right through. And it's also trimmed up just high enough that it's not obstructing a view, because you always want to worry about obstructing a view, especially for safety. So to me, that is just a gorgeous tree. All right, let's quick look at the parts of the tree so we can talk on the same terms here. All right, we all know that obviously this is a trunk. This little guy here and these guys coming up from up below, those are your sucklips. There we go again. Those are the suckers. And you will often find them coming up from the roots. If it is a grafted tree, you'll often find them coming up from below the graft. And then many times they will sprout off of a trunk. We'll have examples of that in a moment. These little branches going straight up from a branch are called your water sprouts. And those are the guys that start forming in response to uneven watering, traumatic pruning, etc. You see them a lot in fruit trees as well. Here is a cross. Can you see my cursor as I move it? All right. Anyway, there's a crossing branch. So the crossing branch you would want to take off, and you would want to take it off here. And we're going to discuss how to take that off. So bottom line, you don't, one big rule, don't ever leave a stub. Where'd my cursor go? Here it is. Don't ever leave a stub like this. If you're going to remove a branch, then remove it back at the origin. So for instance, you see this little guy here, this little branch that's coming off of there. If I don't like the way he's shooting between here, I'm not going to cut him here. I'm going to cut him off at the origin. And then when you cut things at the origin, you always want to look for the collar. We'll have pictures of that in a moment. But the collar of a branch is an area that's just slightly swollen. And you'll understand when I show you the actual picture of a tree. But there's a slightly swollen spot called the collar from which a branch originates. You don't want to cut flush with this branch because then you're cutting into the tissue of the tree. You want to cut out against the collar. Collars have the collar of the tree has a wonderful capability of forming wound wood, which reminds me to tell you, years ago, it was always common practice to seal the tree. If you made a cut, you cut off a branch, a big branch, a small branch. Lots of people always used to paint their tree either with a black tar sealant or with a white latex paint sealant of some sort. They have learned in the last several years that that is totally unnecessary. In fact, it can be detrimental because it actually seals in harmful moisture that can harbor bacteria, that can harbor fungal cells and things, can harbor insect eggs if insects go lay on there. But if you cut it off at the collar and just leave it alone, the tree will quickly produce what they call wound wood. It's like the way we can produce a healthy scab. And then you leave it, and we'll have pictures of what all that looks like. Okay, so we've looked at some of these. We've looked at some of these little tree parts. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so here's an example of if I don't like this branch because maybe I'm thinning it, maybe it's diseased, maybe it's got broken tips, I'm going to go cut it off here at the origin. I'm not going to lop it off here. That is only going to leave a stub. And this is a bad drawing, but you can barely see there's a little swelling place right there. That's your collar. So that branch would come off outside the collar. If you're cutting a branch, maybe there's a branch that is wayward and you don't want the whole thing gone, but you only want a portion of it gone. And this is true whether you're doing fruit trees or shrubs or trees. There's always leaf nodes along your branch. So this is a correct cut. There's your leaf node. That's from where a leaf or new growth is going to develop. So you want to cut about 1/4 of an inch above it at about a 45-degree angle so that water slides off of it, doesn't sit on it while it's healing. And then that means that this leaf node is going to now produce new growth out in that direction. You can see this one's way too angular. You can see this one is too low, because what you've done by cutting it too low is you've actually cut into the tissue where the leaf node is, and you'll damage that leaf node, and that area will probably necrose. And then this, of course, on the end is something too high. One kind of a stub, all of your water and nutrients is being delivered into the leaf node areas. And so when things are cut, they have the ability to heal this. But if you leave a stub this long, it's too far away from where that leaf node is, and it's not going to receive the water and nutrients that it normally would, because now it doesn't have access to that activity. And so this leaving stubs will end up, those stubs will necrose, they'll die, and they'll eventually fall off, leaving a spot, for a decayed spot that can be diseased. All right, here just a drawing of cutting off a branch. So you can see this swollen area here. That's called your leaf collar. And so you would take this off right outside the collar. This is incorrect. Too much of a stub left. This is incorrect. They've taken that branch off, you see, inside the collar, and that's called a flush cut. And then that's going to leave the tree open for disease and decay. When you're using your pruners, Chris, can you see me? I don't know. Well, anyway, I won't worry about it. Okay, so these are bypass. Whoops, these are bypass pruners.
I believe we can see you.
And we'll talk about tools in just on the side. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So if you can see me, this is called a bypass pruner, and we'll talk about this. But bypass means that the two blade pieces bypass one another. It's so important to use something like this rather than an anvil pruner. I'll show you a picture of an anvil in a moment. But this is what I'd like to show you, is positioning your shears. So you can see in the top picture, the blade part or the cutting part is placed next to the trunk so that you can position it exactly outside that collar. Oh, thank you, Randy. You're welcome. Thank you. Okay. If you turn it upside down and you put the thick part of your shear, your thick part of your pruner up against the collar, you can't get as close to that collar as you would like to, and you end up leaving a little bit of branch material. So your blade should always go closest to the growth point, regardless of where you're angling in. It needs to go closest to the growth point. All right, we talked about that. Okay, so here's an example. This is an Arizona white oak over in our Discovery Gardens at U of A. And we just put up this new fencing. Well, it was a beautiful tree with some branching that was very graceful and offered some shading for some underplantings. But when we put the fence up, we needed to get rid of some of the lower branches. So as you can see, we went here and we cut up above, and right here, I don't know if you can see this. I don't think I can make that larger. This is an old cut that was cut outside the collar and healed over nicely. You can see how there's beautiful woundwood there, no open spot. And then these are the recent cuts off of that. So here's your collar, and that's a nice clean cut outside the collar, and the smaller branch here, nice clean cut outside the collar, but with no stub left. All right, let's talk about taking off a large branch. And this is so important. I think a lot of people think that this is just, a detail that the tree people like to bring up. But this is if you're taking a large branch off. If you go straight to this branch and just start cutting it, the weight out here is going to pull it off of that trunk faster than you can get it cut. And when it pulls, what does it do? It's going to rip right down and rip the bark off. So if you can go out about 3, 4, 5 inches and make a little undercut first, then your second cut, make a little cut beyond that, about 3 inches, 4 inches or so. And then that's going to spread the weight out. And then after you, sometimes even, let me see, sometimes here at this cut, even this piece of the branch will fall off. But this first undercut is protecting that branch from ripping that bark and tearing off of that trunk. So first cut under, then go out a ways and do your second cut. And then you can go back after all you have here is a stub and now make your final cut outside the collar. Here's a little close-up of what you do. So that they've got the numbers reversed on this drawing. So come out here first, number 1, then number 2, get all that weight off of it. Now you can go there to your collar. There's an example of somebody that didn't do it. Yep, I'm just in a hurry. I'm just going to go take that branch off. I don't need to do those cuts. They start cutting and the weight tore it right off and left a big open wound. Let me see. Okay. All right. So let's talk about tools for just a moment. So I showed you the bypass pruner, and then this is an anvil pruner here next to it that used to be very popular years ago. But as you can see, these blades do not bypass. As a matter of fact, this part of the blade has a flat surface. So when you cut down and you try to take that blade, cut through a branch and onto this flat surface, it often doesn't make a good clean cut. It often squeezes against the flat surface of that anvil piece. And so it will crush the tissue of the branch first before it makes a clean cut. Here's an example of many tools to use. So there's your bypass pruner. There's an anvil. Try to stay away from those. Don't use an anvil. Your bypass pruners come in a number of sizes. You can get them with short handles. And if you can see me in my screen, I've got a little short handled pruner here that I love to use when I'm doing a little, but something larger. For me, the shorter handles are better ergonomically. Other people prefer longer handles. They get better ergonomic control with longer handles. Your choice. For larger branches that your loppers won't cut, it's always nice to have a tree saw. Tree saws are important. They're very efficient and can make a nice clean cut. I think they're easier to control. Keep losing my cursor. Here we go. Than the great big old-fashioned saw. If you need a big old-fashioned saw, I don't know how many of you have worked with one of these. If you can see me in my screen, I have a little reciprocating saw. It's got a lithium battery. It's got a small blade. It powers, and all you do is learn to control it. You turn it on, hold it by the neck, and then you can, before you turn it on, place it on the branch outside your collar, then turn it on and hold tight. And once you get the feel of it, it's a really good, healthy, safe way to prune that larger branch that you can't get with any of your cutters.
Jan, can
Yes.
I make a suggestion?
Yes.
If it's easy enough to share your screen and go back and forth, we can have you on the full screen so we get this really good for the recording when you show some of those things.
All right. So
I'm not getting any response from the audience to say that would be better, but
all right. Or you know what I could do? I could do it at the end.
okay.
But I don't know how to go back and forth. Or can you do that?
Well,
If
you
can
simply stop your sharing.
Oh, okay.
So the view option at the top.
All right. Well, I've got that at the bottom.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, we
Now,
learn as we go along. Yeah, show that one more time. Sorry.
okay. All righty. So this is a reciprocating saw. And the trigger is here. It's got a safety on the side. So even if you're holding it and you accidentally hit the trigger, it won't go. But you push the safety first, then pull the trigger. But before you ever pull the trigger, get hold of its neck and put that blade right exactly at the outside of the collar. Get it positioned and hold it down tightly. Then pull your trigger. And if you just keep control of it, practice a couple of times on some branches that aren't going to matter. And then once you get the feel, it's a very efficient way of getting through your larger branches without having to go to the old-fashioned saw. The smaller tree saws work very well too. And one of the things I showed was that I've got my pruners. These are the bypass, where the blade bypasses. I have, thank you. I'm going to take it outside later. Okay. I have, We got family going on here, guys. Anyway, I keep small pruners for little small things that I need to cut off. I've got pruners of all sizes. These are my loppers that can cut more than an inch size branch. I've got them in short handles because I really like the control of them, but I've also got big long ones with a bigger blade head that will cut larger branches for me. One thing I do, first of all, is I try to keep my blades clean. Years ago, the popular thing was to use a dilute Clorox solution, about a 1 to 5, 1 to 10 Clorox solution. They found over the years that the Clorox will indeed, after a while, pit your steel. And so it's another thing that's very efficient is your isopropyl alcohol, which is your rubbing alcohol, common alcohol you buy in the drugstore. And so you can use it, you can dilute it by half or whatever, and that's pretty efficient at cleaning up about 98% of the bacteria that you have to worry about. I also keep a little file in my toolbox. Here's one that is kind of small, and then I have another one that's kind of big and flat. And so I will go in, I don't know if you can see this, but I will file the edge right before I start, make sure I've got a good sharp blade. One thing that's hugely damaging to a tree or any shrub or anything you're going to prune is to use old, beat up, dull pruners. They'll rip the bark, rip the tissue, and you're just leaving yourself open for problems. And I think any of you rose aficionados know what I'm talking about. So the blade, I file down, and then on the other side, if I feel like I've got any little nicks that's on this underside, I'll take a little blade and just rub it just flatly along there just to make sure I've got a nice smooth blade there. Okay. I'll go back and talk about, a lot of people will see pole pruners for trees. Go back, there we are. Oh, that was slick, huh, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm getting there. All right, so here's a picture of a tree pole pruner. I know a lot, and those are used for use high in the trees where you can't reach, and you don't want to get on a ladder and that sort of thing. My attitude with those is if you can't reach the branches safely on a ladder, hire a professional. I don't like using these pole pruners. Maybe a lot of you have experience with them. I'm sure Chris does with his arborist experience. But I find that you've got to position them perfectly correctly for them to make a healthy cut. And sometimes you get them up there and they're kind of wiggly, and then you try to use them and it hasn't cut where you ever thought it was going to. So if you like using the pole pruners, go for it. But I tend to say I can't control it well enough.
Jen, one of the reasons I like pole pruners is because it keeps people's feet on the ground. They don't go up in ladders.
Exactly.
So
Okay.
I do like pole pruners, and I find you can do a lot of good work with them.
Okay, perhaps I need to practice, but again, I find if I can't reach it, I'm probably going to get somebody else to do it. So I think it depends on you, your confidence, your safety, your arm strength, your own body height. So they're available. I know lots of people really like them. So if you can use them, super. This is a picture of somebody cutting with an anvil. So I'm going to show you a closer up picture. See that flat piece there? When they put this blade through that tissue, it's not going to slice very well. It's going to go flat against here and kind of and damage that tissue. And what else is going wrong in this picture? Well, what spot is it that they're pruning? Right in the middle of a branch. There's no particular point to it, and they're just going to end up leaving a big stub here. If they needed to redirect growth, but they didn't want to lose the whole branch, they could at least go to where there's a growth point and cut right up above it if they're trying to maybe make this little leaf node start to grow in this direction, if they just have to have that branch. But cutting in the middle is a no-no. All right, here is a big sweet acacia. The request on this sweet acacia, because it was sending branches over a sidewalk and it was low, was to please trim it up so that it got off the sidewalk where people were going to run into it, and to clean it up. Here's what happened. Can y'all see this stub? Chris, can you see that? Is that obvious enough?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a stub there. There are a couple of 3 stubs throughout here. And so the person who went in and trimmed it just started cutting branches. See this branch here? That crossing branch got left. It's right going through the middle of the tree. That could have been cut way down here at the base where it's connected to the trunk. This crossing This crossing branch here is going to be another problem. All of these suckers were left all over the tree. Suckers left on a tree like that do nothing but sap its energy. And that tree has the potential to be absolutely splendid looking. It's got beautiful multiple trunks, but all the messy suckers were left all over it. Okay, so there are a couple of crossing branches. All right, there's a close-up of one of the stubs that was left. You can see even in the back, see some of these water sprouts. Here's a water sprout that was left going straight up through the tree. It's also growing with a crotch that is so narrow that as this water sprout begins to enlarge, it's gonna join and interrupt the trunk's growth activity. There's another stub that was left. Not only is that unhealthy, it's unsightly. All right, and this is just another picture of some of the little water sprouts and crossing branches and things on that tree. This is the other side. No, what is this? I can't remember which tree this is. This is a different tree. I happened upon this tree on campus, and this is a spot where this tree right here was pruned, and the branch was so heavy that there's an old bark rip here, and it ripped, and then it was damaged so badly that then the rest of the bark, which used to join up here, began to pull away as well. So it's lost all of that. It's also developed a water sprout at the site it was improperly cut, and we've got a stub on this side. So, and then there's a water sprout coming up here that's growing parallel to that branch and just rubbing that. So there are like so many different things wrong with this, and it could have all been avoided. Here's a desert willow that the pruner thought it was getting too big for the area. It used to be lovely and hang over this picnic table, but the pruner thought it was getting too massive. And so much of that tree was taken off. So there is one thing when you're pruning something to correct for safety or health or damage or whatever, don't remove more than 25% of the tree at one time. Some books will tell you it's okay to remove up to 30%, but a good safe rule is more than 25%. So a lot of this tree was removed. Look at this cut. That's called a flush cut. You see, now this one's pretty good. See, these still got the collar. It was cut right outside the collar. This one was cut outside the collar. This old cut was flush cut right into the tree, right into the tissue. And that's a close-up of it. This has nothing to do with deciduous trees. I threw it in just because a lot of people have trees that are actually shrubs developed into a tree. So you see photinia trees, they're not a different species. They're actually a shrub that's been trained into a tree. Oleander trees do that. Pineapple guava trees. There are lots of trees that are really, really shrubs. Bottlebrush trees. And so when a tree is formed from a shrub, when they're training it, they will identify a central leader and then keep everything off of it and then let the top grow. But it is natural for them to keep wanting to be a shrub like they were born. And so they'll keep wanting to put out these little side shoots. So anytime they put out side shoots, that's a lot of energy that that tree's putting into these. So all you want to do is you just want to get your little clippers and you just want to go in there and clip them off at the origin. Don't leave all little stubs, just clip them off right at the origin where they're coming out without digging into the tissue of the trunk. And that's going to allow a lot of the energy now to concentrate on the formation of this part of the tree. Another example of flush cuts. Not so good looking. And those are fairly recent. So they haven't even really had time to heal. They haven't had time to develop problems. This one's not as bad because there's a little bit of the collar there, but everything else is cut right into the tissue. And this is just another example of stubs being left. So if they wanted to keep this long branch, then this stub, they should have this is kind of dark. I took this picture during the rain, the first week we were supposed to have this 2 weeks ago, and the rain kind of took away a lot of my light. But where am I? Okay, so there's a little bit of a collar here. So this thing should have been cut right here outside the collar, and then those stubs would never have been left there. It's unhealthy, it's unsightly. There's another stub left on here. All right, just a picture of example of suckers coming up from the tree. So here's your basic tree. All these suckers that have been allowed to grow from underneath the ground, coming off the root system, are doing nothing but sapping that tree's energy, not to mention taking away its beauty. So here's a little example. This is a purple leaf plum, and it's actually quite young. That isn't even 2 years old yet. It's probably been planted 18 months ago. Already developing suckers. Again, this was taken in the rain, so it's not real bright, but cursor, where's cursor? Here it is. So there's a sucker coming off this one, and there's a sucker coming off the back. If those would come off, it would get rid of a lot of the tree's energy waste. And let's go to a close-up. So here are the suckers coming off that little purple leaf plum. What else do you see there? Yup, animals have gotten to it. So not only are the suckers being allowed to stay on there, but now you've got animal damage. Those are either very tall rabbits or tenacious javelina. We don't know what got into this tree, but it's damaged, and all these big open wounds do nothing but invite problems. So this should be cut off back down here. Take that sucker off. Don't cut into the tissue, but there's a little bit of a swelling where that sucker's formed. So it's got its own branch, it's got its own collar already. Cut outside that collar. And then if you've got suckers coming up from beneath, cut the suckers off wherever you can find the origin. This is just a drawing of, I've seen trees that get damaged and disease on one half of them. And so sometimes it's a sacrifice for a little bit, but you find the collar, take the whole thing off at the origin. Don't just start chopping away at it. If it's diseased and damaged, get rid of it. Leave the collar, and this part of the healthy tree will eventually make up. It'll get there. This is a drawing of a tree that had a double trunk growing together. This is different than a multiple trunk tree. These were growing together. And this is an example of if you've got a big double trunk, take off one half of it, because that's going to do nothing but form a crotch, and it's going to be weak. And as it gets bigger, that can split. And so this is a drawing of what happens later as that trunk has grown together, and all it's done is make this unhealthy crotch. So see, if that had been identified when it was young, again, if that's an example of a good time to train a tree if you need to. And this poor old tree's got, where's the cursor here? Got lots of problems. So let's go on. Now, here's an example of a multi-trunk tree. This is different. Things that have multiple trunks, like olives, are classic for having multiple trunks, and they're beautiful, and they should be shown off. So gray ashes have multiple trunks. Vitex have multis. So this tree, was simply trimmed up a little bit to start showing off its trunks. And over here, it's not trimmed up enough to be what we call lion-tailed. You'll see pictures of that. But it's trimmed up enough to show the drama and the beauty of those multiple trunks. This is a fairly young desert willow. It was planted from, I believe, a 24-inch box. And I think it's been in the ground maybe 18 months. I don't know if you can see the problems, but if it's trained now while it's young, you can make that a gorgeous tree. But let's look close up and see what all's going on. Look at the suckers. Again, I took this in the rain. It's a little dark. Here's a sucker. It's already pushing up against the main trunk. So this sucker could come off. Find it at its origin. Don't cut into the tissue of the tree, but get your blade back there and cut it off at the origin. Here are some low little sucker type things, little branches that are taking off to crisscross through that tree. These three little guys are not going to serve any purpose. They're just extra little branches shooting across the middle of that tree. If those are all trimmed off now very cleanly, then you're going to have this beautiful multiple trunk that's starting to form and show. What did I see here? Well, okay, I thought I saw something to show you. All right, and this is a tree with water sprouts. Just lots and lots of water sprouts. Oh, I know what I was going to show you. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so if I was going to take this branch off here, you see how it's already got a baby collar? So even young trees have already got collars. Don't go into that, go right outside it, but don't go up here and leave a stub. You take off your water sprouts the same way. Go here at the origin, don't cut into the tissue, don't leave a stub. All those upright branches. And water sprouts that go straight up are weak. They just whip in the wind, and water sprouts, even like on fruit trees too, don't necessarily produce any fruit worth keeping. This is a, let me see, what was I going to do with this one? Oh, this is typical gorgeous mesquite that's just developed a lot of dead branches. Can you picture how beautiful this tree would be if all these dead branches were removed? Find their origin back at the branch, get them all off back at the main branch. It will gorgeous up that tree. Here's a mesquite. And the first thing that we noticed was this poor old branch has gotten so heavy and long, this actually hangs down to the ground. And so groundskeeper can't get under it. We can't get under it to prune the rose bushes. And this is actually in our rose garden. And then when you trace it back, look at this whole thing. This whole thing traces all the way back to a branch that's back at this trunk and crossing right through the crotch of those two trunks. So it's like, don't even mess with all of this. Go back to your 3-step cut. Go back here, locate your collar, cut up first, then go here and cut down. That'll get rid of the weight of that big, long, heavy branch, and then cut off at the collar. That will solve so many problems with that tree right away. All right. Oh, I thought I had a different picture for you. I missed a picture. There they are. Okay, these are 2 trees right outside our observatory, our Patterson Observatory on our little campus here in Sierra Vista. And the arborist was asked to trim some branches to get it away from the observatory. He started with this one. You can see that both of them looked somewhat alike. And now this one is really bare, going quite far up, and really, to me, got a little bit over pruned. This one could stand to take a little bit off of here to be proactive, but you could find where some of these branches here are connected back to a branch in here, and then cut that branch where branches connect so that you still leave growth some way. Just cut them at an origin. You don't have to cut the entire branch off, but cut off a supporting branch that you can get rid of some of this. But let's look at what this tree behind it now looks like. You see how bare? It's very, very bare. It's kind of sad and unsightly. If we just left the greenery down to about here, it would still be pretty. It would still be safe. It wouldn't be crawling all over that building. And that's a close-up of when you walk by it. Now what you're looking at is nothing but trunks. This is a white oak that's called lion tailing. When you trim up so far that what you have is big puffs of growth at the tips, so they look like big lion tails. It weakens the tree because now what you've done is you've taken off first more than 25% of that tree. You've taken off a mass of leaves where all of your photosynthetic activity is going on. And so you've weakened the tree and really destroyed its form. This is a tree, an oak. This is out in the Huachucas at a home. And this is a good old native emery oak. This is Quercus emeryi. Look at the form. This homeowner had the beautifully groomed. They're thinned enough that you can see through them, but they're massive enough and thick enough that they're gorgeous and lush. There are no cross branches that you can see. The trunks are showing off beautifully. Nothing's been chopped. No stubs have been left. All right, so now I'm going to show you over to the right of that tree is where the front of this house is. A new homeowner moved into this house, and this house actually was built around an emery oak just like this right next to it. But look what the new homeowner did. So this is right here. This tree here used to look just like this, except it was trimmed up a little bit so that you could easily walk into the entry, but the tree was accented and really enhanced. It was like it was graced by that oak. The new homeowners moved in and decided that it needed to be trimmed. So you can see that, golly, more than half of that foliage was removed. And now, I don't know, somebody here may think that's gorgeous. I wish they'd left it down just, another 4 or 5 feet lower. And that's what it looks like now, is a big lion-tailed tree out in front of this home. All right, we talked about thinning. This is just an example of a before. The branches are low. The tree is thick. And right here, you see how you can't really see down the street? You can't see through the neighborhood. Now they've thinned it a little. They've limbed it up. That's called limbing it up, when you start to take the limbs up a little bit. Don't need to take off a lot. Take up a little bit, pruning it correctly. correct branch pruning, and maybe getting in and thinning. That's going to require professionals, obviously, but you can see through the tree, yet it doesn't look chopped up. You've got air through it, you've got light through it. Even the shade, well, over here, you can't see, this shade over here is quite dense. Now you're starting to open this up a little bit and you can now see down the street. This is a tree on our campus that was heavily pruned, and I understand because it was encroaching on the parking lot. But more than 25% of that tree was taken off. I get it, but then look here. You see what's here on this side? Those are suckers, and there are water sprouts here. Those could have easily just been lopped off at the time the tree was pruned. So that's a close-up. So this whole set of suckers even has its own little branch collar. Just go in outside that collar and take that whole thing off. Here's another cluster of them. Take them off. Take those water sprouts off. Now you've got kind of an interesting little trunk form. All right, here's a point I want to make. I even remember when I was growing up, if my dad planted a new tree, first thing he did was he went out and he cut off all the lower branches so that he just had branches at the top, thinking he was going to raise that tree and make the tree grow thicker at the top. And I think that's been a very common practice up until maybe the last 20 years or so. In the 90s, they began to realize that if you leave those lower branches on, see these lower branches down here, if you leave them on for the first at least year, all the photosynthetic material or activity that's going on in the leaves, they send all the sugars into the trunk. You've got a lot more nutrition for that tree. The caliper of your tree, caliper means how large your trunk is. The caliper of the tree will enlarge faster. The trunk will become stronger more quickly. And so you don't take anything off. After a year, you can go in and start taking some lower branches off little by little. So this is a Buckeye oak. This is Quercus bucklei. For those of you who know the Shumard oak, which is Quercus shumardii, it's very similar in that it is a deciduous oak with the big classic oak leaves and gives you a beautiful fall color. So we planted this guy. It's been 18 months. We left all of these on. And then about a month ago, we went out and started taking off some of these little branches. Look at how big that trunk is. And I'm telling you, that has more than doubled in size in 18 months. There's the tree trimmed up. We didn't take very much off, just enough to start showing his trunk, enough to make him start looking like a great tree. And we can take off a little bit more next year. And then, because it's famous for its fall color, look what it did 2 weeks later. Is that gorgeous? Beautiful fall color. That's Quercus bucklei. All right, talk about, how am I doing on time, Chris? I have so much to say.
Well, we're getting about 10 minutes to the top of the hour. We can go.
Oh, gosh.
But
Okay.
I've gotten several questions popped up. So if we want to deal with those questions, we can. You just covered a really important point about how to take care of a young tree. And I think it's really important to know about these nursery stakes. So,
all right, let me tell you this real quick, and then we can maybe do some questions. And then for those who want to stay on, I can keep going. And I know you need to go to lunch too, Chris. Oh, sorry about the
I'm
dogs.
here with you.
Yeah. Okay, just real quickly. So many people buy trees and there's nursery stakes taped to the tree in the containers that keeps them stable during shipment and stable during the sale, and then stable for the tree after you take the tree home. Once you get that tree in the ground, please take that nursery stake off. Many trees will stand on their own if you get that stake off. Anytime a tree stands on its own, don't stake it. Think of the trunk as a muscle. And that muscle has to have a little bit of movement and it develops its strength. And even if it moves a little bit in the wind, that's okay. That's its exercise. But get the nursery stake off. It rubs against the trunk. It can rub the trunk and cause lesions and cause damage. It also suppresses the growth of any little branch growth that wants to come up along there. It suppresses its growth. All right. And then if you ever do need to stake a tree, wish I had a really great cursor. Okay, put your stake out a little ways, put 2 stakes in, find the direction of your wind, and stake it so that the tree, you're staking it with strength against the wind. So out here, well, our wind always comes from the southwest. So I'm gonna stake it so that that tree is stable against the southwest winds. Put your stakes out, and then even if when you do stake it, Tie it so that there's still movement in that tree a little bit. You don't want it staked so tightly that it can't move. It's got to exercise. A little exercise is going to be wonderful for it. And wires. So these wires are okay because they've got the rubber around them. But how often do you see neighbors take the wire, wrap it around the tree, or it's just not good. Here's a classic example. Oh, and then once your tree stands on its own, take that stake off. If you can get the stake off in 6 months, do it. You can get it off in a year, do it. The minute it stands alone, get them off. These wires were put on here and then neglected, never reviewed. Now the tree, the bark and trunk tissue is growing around the wires, and then that girdles that tree. And so I don't know if I should do a quick explanation on girdling. And here's another example that's going to girdle right into the trunk. Think of underneath that bark, there is a whole growth community. And so think of it as a highway. There's a highway that goes up to the top of the tree called the xylem, and that carries all the nutrients and water from the roots up to the top of the tree. And then there's a highway that runs right next to it called the phloem, and that's all where all the nutrients from the top of the tree flow back down to the roots. So the xylem goes up, the phloem goes down. If you cut into that bark, what have you done? You've cut the highways of the xylem and the phloem. Now you don't have any up and down. Now you've destroyed the health of the tree. And if you girdle, that's called girdling. If you girdle that trunk all the way around, that is a sure certain death of the tree. You want to stop for questions? I'll show a couple of things on topping, or you want me to top real quick?
Why don't we jump into questions here?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't we go ahead and stop the screen? We'll bring us up.
Okay.
And we'll go into those questions.
Sure.
And we can come back.
Okay, and I'll go as fast as I can, and I thank you. I probably won't. Anyway.
People who show up for these, they love gardening. We love you. So I think we already had Joe say it's fine for us to go into the lunch hour. So we're
nice.
good.
Okay.
So let me first jump into the chat box. So there were some things just a little earlier on. But one person just wanted to confirm that suckers are the same as volunteers. And I think we use those terms, water sprouts, suckers, volunteers.
They get interchanged, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So one attendee, when you were talking earlier about how to do the 1, 2, 3 cut on a large branch, she said, saved her husband from making a big mistake and getting clobbered on the head.
Yes. So, I didn't mention the safety factor, did I? I'm only concerned about the trees. Bad me.
Yeah. And Jane asks, how do you prune a silver dollar tree eucalyptus? And it's the same as what we've been doing with the others. But do you have anything in particular about eucalyptus? I know that they tend to be a little brittle.
They are brittle because eucalyptus are fast growing trees. First of all, they're evergreen. They're not going to lose their leaves. Second of all, eucalyptus is known as a tree that's a very fast grower. And so keep in mind that the advantage of fast grower has a downside. Trees that grow very fast also have a much weaker structure. So that's why in windstorms, you will see them break and lose branches and things. So if you have limb breakage on eucalyptus or anything like that that's a fast grower, find the point of the break and then make sure that that is cut off and back to the origin. Clean up those breaks. Don't ever leave anything jagged. And again, you can look at if you think your eucalyptus needs to be pruned, look at it for maybe branches that are too low, hanging on the ground. That could be a safety issue. Look for your broken branches. Look for anything dead. Look for, sometimes they get so thick that eucalyptus could be thinned. That will help them to let the wind go through them rather than resisting because they are so prone to breaking in windstorms. So I'd look for any thinning possibility, any broken, that sort of thing. Thus, the oaks are very slow, but very strong. That's why they call oaks the mighty oak. Okay, that's a side note.
Great. Okay, and Cheryl has some confirmation about the 25% rule, and you've been talking about that. So she asks, if a tree has lots of suckers such that pruning them would be greater than 25% of the tree's volume, do you prune in parts over time? Same question about the tree has damage or disease in over 25% of it.
Okay.
I don't know if you go ahead, you understand it.
Okay, if you agree with me, but even if it's more than 25%, I'd take them off. Suckers are doing nothing but sapping your energy. Dead branches I'd take them off, and I'd take dead and diseased and broken stuff off any time of the year that you find it. There is no good thing that comes from leaving any of those things on a tree. So when you find them, remove them. Your tree will thank you.
Good. Um,
It's just more stuff and junk that poor trees trying to.
yeah, and it's not the main biomass and form of the tree. It's those water sprouts that, you get to them sooner than they become part of the tree, so.
Right.
Steve Grayson's up in Flagstaff. He's asking when to prune. I think as soon as the snow starts to melt.
That's a good thought. I will tell you that when you read about pruning, it will say that there are a few trees that can be damaged if you prune them in the winter. And I would say if you've got specific trees that you don't know commonly about their pruning practices, get out your good old a tree identification book or good old Sunset Western Garden book and look up your tree, because the plant encyclopedia in the Sunset Garden book is so good about telling you the needs of your plant. When it will flower, does it need pruning? How do you prune? When do you prune? Does it flower on old wood, new wood? All those things you need to know about pruning. So identify it first, and many times you'll find out. But most good rule of thumb is pruning in late winter when things are still dormant. It allows you to see the form of the tree because the leaves are gone.
I really appreciate you bringing up that resource, because trees are their own species and they have their own particularities. One thing that they say about don't prune in the middle of the winter in some places, because it just gets too cold and they can get a little cold damage from pruning and clearing it up that way.
Mm-hmm. And I also
Depending on the species, even in Flagstaff, we typically don't get that cold that's going to happen, but you need to look at the species.
I also know I've read in 2 different places. I always used to think that mesquites and our native trees and things should be pruned in the dead of winter, because if you prune them when they're actively growing in the summer, then they try so hard to repair that just when you get the water sprouts. But then I recently came across another academic publication that said prune them in the summer. So I think, oh, you know what? That takes more research now. And speaking of research, let me slip this in, Chris. Wonderful resource for those of you who don't know it. If you go on to arizona.edu/pubs, that's arizona.edu/pubs. That's all the academic and science-based publications. There'll be a search bar. You could put in there pruning deciduous trees. You'll bring up lots of publications. You'll bring up research. Maybe you want a thing on pruning conifers. Pruning conifers is a very different topic and a different time of the year. So, and you can put up anything. How do I plant a peach tree? How do I plant a bulb? Anything you want to know, arizona.edu/pubs.
Perfect.
Okay.
Good little plug there.
Yeah.
Again, Nancy Meister is just confirming what is a water sprout, and we said water sprouts. Volunteers, the suckers, we're all calling those the same things. They're basically just this adventitious bud that'll grow off of a branch rather than be, I don't know, how would you describe that? They're kind of, like I said, they're adventitious.
Yeah, they all seem opportunistic to me. And they're all in response to some form of stimulus, most of the time, some form of negative stimulus. Irregular watering. Is that are you asking me that, Chris?
Yeah, or too much light on a branch,
Yeah.
just what places they're able to take advantage of it.
A damage, an improper pruning. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons that things start to form like that. And it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong.
No.
It's just like a child misbehaving, you just correct it and okay, go on.
Okay, and Susan asks, if there is a stub, can you go out and remove it? Yes, go do that. VH asks about mistletoe. Do you cut it out? Now that becomes a whole nother conversation of mistletoe. So briefly, and maybe we could do a presentation. I could do a whole webinar about mistletoe.
Yeah, we could. You want to answer it? You want me to answer it?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's another thing, well, and Chris should answer too, because if you put 5 different tree people up in the front of a room, they're going to give you 5 different answers. And one person may give you 2 different answers. They used to think, cut it all off, wrap it in burlap. Then people say, cut it all off, wrap it in plastic. Oh, no, don't do that. Then I've heard just cut it off at the branch, because what it is, it's a parasite. And some people felt that if you cut it too often, you're actually pruning it, which stimulates new growth. But a lot of the mistletoes are really good because they produce berries. and that is a primary food source for our native bird, the phainopepala. In fact, I think that's almost 100% of their food source. And
She's
so
in my yard right now.
yes. So I
Phainopepala.
know people that will leave like one tree over here with mistletoe in it for the phainopepalas, and then take the other trees and groom them up. Um, Sometimes you
So
can knock it out, and if you just knock it out, then you're not cutting into the tissue. That's what I do in the discovery gardens. We just reach up and we knock the mistletoe out, and we feel like we're getting a clean removal.
when I think about mistletoe, and you just hit on some of the things that I think about, if it's the typical mistletoe for Christmas, the one that you're going to take a little and put it on the door on the doorsill so that you can get a kiss, that is kind of a real invasive one that'll get on lots of different species of trees. I think that's a good one to cut out. But again, it is something that the trees, birds can eat. So taking that one and, as you're saying, knock it out, keep it at a minimum on the branches. That's good. Then we have our mesquite and acacia. A lot of and just almost all of our native trees have their own mistletoes.
Yeah, they're
Um,
different species.
they have evolved with each other. It may not be the most sightly thing for some people, but it's not going to kill that tree in your lifetime, most of us. And as long as and if you're able to give that tree a little extra water, you're giving some important food source to animals, to the birds in the winter months when they need it, because that's when the mistletoe tends to fruit. And so, and then you got the dwarf mistletoe on pine trees. And so, like I say, we could have our own conversation on mistletoes.
I agree. We need a whole workshop on it. I agree. And so much research on it.
Yeah.
It's interesting to present.
So it's noon. If people need to get going, feel free to do so. I'm going to continue on with Jan until we get talked out. I hope that's not too long. We'll see.
It won't be. It won't be.
As long as people are staying with us, that's great. We're going to record this, and you can just skip over to catch that last half hour Q&A. We'll see how long it goes. But we still got more questions coming along here, Jan.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'm not too sure we're good to answer this question, so we may have to do this later. But Heather's asking, what are your thoughts about pruning aspen?
That I can't answer because, first of all, they don't grow at our elevation here, so I don't have them. I know that they do a lot of underground runner growing, you know, the aspen groves and all of that. I can't answer that from experience or knowledge.
So Heather, you need to be where aspens do well. Aspens tend to be pretty short-lived because we plant them off-site and they just really don't have the right resources to do well. And other than shape and form that Jan has mentioned, I would say just a little bit of just pruning up. What's it called? The vista pruning. So you're taking some of those lower branches off so it has a little form. But aspens are difficult landscape trees, ornamental trees to keep. I would recommend different trees than aspen and enjoy those up on the mountain when you can see them.
Yeah, when they grow naturally, they're absolutely fantastic. I can't grow them at my altitude. And I agree with Chris. I've always heard that it's a bad one to try to plant as a cultivar that you've added to your landscape. Have you ever noticed that anything that volunteers in your yard does really, really well and much better than the guy right next to it that you planted? Just the way it is.
Yep. Okay, so next question. What to do with an aged lilac bush that has become woody and limited fullness? So reviving like an old lilac bush.
Well, that's in shrub pruning, and that's a little bit different topic because you've also got to know, does your lilacs lilacs bloom on old wood? So one of the problems that people do is so old wood means it blooms on what the wood that it produced last year. So if you prune lilac in the middle of winter, it hasn't produced, you've taken off the wood it produced last year. That's where the flower buds are formed. So I hope if you guys can understand that, versus something like a crepe myrtle that blooms on new wood. So you do cut a crepe myrtle in the winter because you want to stimulate lots of new growth to come out in the spring, because it's all that new growth that will produce the flower. Lilacs produce on old wood. So anything that produces on old wood, like lilacs, like forsythia, tombstone rose or ladybank's rose, you wait. You let them flower in the spring. The early spring flowerers, you let them flower first. And then after they have their flower rush, then you prune them back, and then they produce all that wood, which is going to be next year's flower, if that makes sense. Okay.
And the other thing is you did have a little bit about multi-trunked trees, which aren't necessarily shrubs, but some of those concepts will apply here.
Yes. And it's the same with flowering trees. I saw a little question come up that said, what about topping trees? If I go to my next slide, we're going to get right on it. And I've also got a little section coming up about know your plant. And I'm going to show you some mistakes people made because they didn't know what plant they were pruning.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and go back to that and we'll come back to questions.
I'd love to, and I'll stay as long as anybody wants for
Okay.
questions. Okay.
All right.
So let me share screen real quick. Okay, so these are topped trees. People top trees for various reasons. They think they're going to control their size. They're going to control them going into a house. They're going to control their shape, etc. When you top a tree, all you're doing is offending it. Once you top it, you've taken away a lot of the food source. You pretty much destroying its natural form. And then it tries so hard to recover, you're really weakening that tree a lot. So topping is not good. If you have to top a tree because it's gotten too tall or too big, it's the wrong tree in the wrong spot. So let me tell you the thing that I always tell people when they're going to plant a tree: look beside you, know the eventual width of that crown of that tree, and know how far it's going to go, and make sure that you plant it far enough away from your house that it's not going to be on top of your roof or into a wall. The other thing people forget to do is look up. Is it going to be up in an eave of your house? Maybe you think you're planting a skinny tree like an Italian cypress, or maybe a yew pine, a Podocarpus microphylla or heterophylla, or something that's of that nature. But it doesn't help if it's skinny, if it's going to be in the eave of your house. Biggest mistake is trees and wires. So I'll show you a couple of things like that in just a minute. If you really have to control the tree, then just try to do selective removal of the branches. So like for instance here, this branch could have been just removed at the origin. A couple of these branches that were going out and over the house could be removed at the origin, but leave enough branch work that still has enough foliage on it. So I think topping is just not good. And then what happens? The tree works so hard to recuperate that it will always put out abnormal growth. It'll put out lots of whips and lots of suckers and water sprouts. And even though some people say, oh, look at how the tree recovered and I've got all this great form, the form is abnormal and weak. These are trees that from Asheville, North Carolina, that were topped all along this street. And the owner of this strip mall actually got fined $19,000 for destroying those trees. And so he had a choice. He either had to pay the fine or he had to agree to remove all of those trees and replant and let them recover. But he put them in the wrong place, or he didn't prune them and take off branches that were offensive, because you see the wires right above them. So he planted the trees, never saw the wires coming, didn't pay attention to the future, and that's what happened. But you can still prune a tree and sort of take out selective branches that might not get into the wires. There's always some way around it. All right, so this is a tree that's been topped multiple times. I'm sure all of us have seen this in some neighborhood. So this guy's, in fact, his collars are so big and fat, I'm going to bet he's been topped every year for years. They put these, so the tree's trying to recover, and what he does is he puts out all this sucker type growth. You can call them suckers, you can call them water sprouts, but they're whips. They're abnormal, they're unnatural, they're weak, they break, and the tree, once it's topped, will never return to its normal form. Here are two more. Look at how crazy. This poor guy just doesn't know what to do with himself. He's just all over the place trying to recover. And this guy over here almost looks like some Joshua tree cactus, where this was at once, I can't even tell you what kind of tree it is, but it tried so hard to recover, it's put out tufts at the end of each one of its branches. So somebody said something about topping. Do you have another question on topping right now? I'm glad to answer it. It's not a way to control a size or a safety issue. There's always another way around it. If the only way you can control it is to keep topping it, it's never going to be beautiful again, unfortunately. Okay, so this is a little section I'm calling Know Your Plant. So, how many times is somebody hired to do some pruning, but they don't know what plant they're pruning. And then you've always got the landscapers. I don't mean to bum on landscapers. Anybody does this. The people that like to turn things into meatballs, like gorgeous Texas Rangers that you can just hand prune and maintain their shape, but people insist on taking a hedge trimmer, turning them into a meatball. Okay, so this is a beautiful Vitex tree. Vitex trees are wide. They get a perfect height because they're not so big that they're offensive, but they're tall enough to be a beautiful specimen. So they fit into a courtyard. They fit into a smaller area of a yard. And yet look at its beautiful little trunk here, little multi-trunk. All right, so this guy came along and pruned this Vitex tree, took 4 feet off of it, thinking it was a bush because he didn't know what it was. So he took the top off the Vitex, but left all the suckers. Okay, that's the thing about know your plant. Here's a Greg ash. Greg ash is its common name. Another common name is little leaf ash. It's a sister to our native Arizona ash. So this is Fraxinus gregii. Fraxinus gregii is evergreen. It's one of my very favorite specimens because it's tall, again, tall enough to be lovely, short enough that it doesn't take over things, wide enough. It makes a super cool specimen tree. So let's say you need a privacy tree outside your kitchen window, for instance, because you don't want to see the next door neighbor. Well, when you plant a regular tree, eventually you're looking at his trunk. If you plant a shrub, sometimes it doesn't get tall enough. But a Greg ash gets fat in just the right place. Gets fat in the middle where you can use a little privacy. But Greg ashes almost always have a beautiful multiple trunk. This is not a good photo. But under there, there's some multiple trunks. You could even take a little bit more of that off and show its multiple trunk off. The next picture is a heartbreaker. It's a young Greg ash. It had been in the ground 18 months. Somebody thought it was a huge overgrown shrub and trimmed it into a ball. That was at one time a 6-foot tall Greg ash that was just starting to get his personality. Know your plant. This is an olive. I think almost all of us know olives. It's a fruitless olive, does not produce fruit. Most olives grow with this fabulous, dramatic, multiple trunk, adds to its beauty and its personality. They will start with lots of branches at the bottom, but if you start training it as it's young and take off the lower branches, you can show off that trunk. Some people like to leave a little bit more foliage on and not have so much of the trunk showing. I can see here where they might have done it so that they can show off the garden, leave enough sunlight for everything that's an underplanting. Same thing. Somebody came along, saw an olive tree that had been in the ground 18 months, thought it was a shrub, and cut a 7-foot, it was already at 7 feet. Look at this olive. Trimmed it into a ball. Didn't pay any attention to its lower trunk because instead of taking 4 feet off the top, they could have gone in here and started taking a little off the bottom. This is the same tree. See those multiple trunks forming? How gorgeous was that starting to be? So who knows how long it will take for him to, fortunately, they can start branching and doing well. This may end up being a beautifully thick tree now that the person knows this is an olive and maybe won't cut it again. And that's a view from afar. Look at the multiple trunks they're starting. But this used to be that big. Know your plant. Okay, that's the end of my PowerPoint. That was this morning's sunrise. Now I can take all the questions you want.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That
Yes.
was great. And thank you for putting together all those slides. And those of us who can stick around, we're going to go ahead and run it out. And because when you've got a chance to ask Jan Groth questions about pruning trees, you take it. Yeah.
Well, all of us, I like to just have a garden jam. To me, when we get on webinars, it's a chance for people to talk a little bit and talk gardening. So I'm glad to help out. I don't know all the answers, but we can figure it out.
We'll do our best here. Okay, so H. Campoy is asking, do you prune branches from the mesquite girdler insect on mesquites?
I don't see that as damage. I don't know if you agree with me. Mesquite girdlers are actually, they're sort of normal in nature. And a lot of people consider them nature's natural pruners because a mesquite girdler, for those of you who know what it does, she goes in and she finds a spot on the branch, might be a little opening, may not. She finds a spot and she chews away the bark in a circle, which girdles that branch. So what happens is on the growth side of that branch, it's now going to die from the girdling, and she goes into that tissue and simply lays her eggs. And when she's finished and she's raised her young, off she goes, and the end of the branch falls on the ground, and the rest of the branch is perfectly healthy. If it leaves a branch ending that is unsightly to you, you can always take that branch off at an origin somewhere, whether it's back on a smaller branch where it forks or all the way back. But you don't have to take that branch off for the health of the tree. She has not hurt the tree. You agree with that, Chris?
I am 100% in agreement. Perfect.
Okay.
Next question from John. Once you've damaged a tree, can it be repaired? So you were showing some of those poor plants. So John's hoping we can fix these damaged trees.
I think it all depends on what the plant is and how it was damaged. So if you've got an example, let's tackle it.
John, if you're able to go into the chat, if you're still with us, we can try
Or
to
he can
do
even
that.
unmute if he wants and just ask it. Sure.
Now, let me see if there's a John in the list still. If this is the right John. Okay, so John, you go ahead and get on. I'm going to go to the next question from Cheryl here. See if you can get on the phone, on the microphone. Cheryl says, if tree diseased but has water sprout that isn't, can you prune so that the water sprout takes over that branch, as long as it isn't totally vertical?
Well, that's a good question. I will tell you, I have one tree that I like and some people don't. I love a catalpa. Catalpa is a tree that grows here in our high desert. It's a cross between a desert willow and a catalpa. And sometimes they get their bark cranky. And I had a catalpa in my backyard, actually in a courtyard. And the upper part of the tree just got so bad looking and so many of its branches died. I cut the tree off one day thinking I was offending it to keep it there. And it was in the warmth of the season. And within about 2 weeks, some suckers did indeed start up. And by the end of the season, they were obviously small trunks. So I chose the trunks that I thought would make a pretty tree. And then I cut the rest of them off. And to this day, I have a beautiful multiple trunk catalpa in my courtyard. So it depends on the plant, obviously. And does the plant have the ability to produce new suckers that will develop? Part of that I could consider a rejuvenation cut. Some things respond to what we call rejuvenation cuts. I divert just a little bit, but for instance, Texas Rangers can get really tall and woody if you haven't kept them cut. And so you can cut an entire Texas Ranger down, leaving, 3 or 4 inches of the stems on the bottom. And in the grow season, you will find that the whole thing will all resprout into a new shrub. Salvia greggii respond to a rejuvenation cut, but then things like upright rosemary and things do not. So whatever you're going to attack, you probably ought to research just a little bit.
That's good. John, I'm going to give you a moment here if you want to unmute. Okay, well, I'm going to keep on moving along here. And if you aren't able to do that, I'm going to assume you can't. So I'm
still there. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to run over to the chat box where we had some things with Cheryl. Cheryl's been talking a lot to us here, but Cheryl's just asking for a class on pruning shrubs and flowering, roses and lilacs. That'd be a nice presentation of its own. She's right.
I actually just did that for our master gardeners last week. We did a little thing on pruning for flower production and, the things that you need to prune right now for that. So maybe we can put something together sometime.
I think we can bring it back. And Cindy's asking for a class on pruning fruit trees. That's another specialty here. What I like about this one that we're having about ornamental trees, we're teaching you the basics, branch collars, how to get into the specifics of the trees. So
no topping, no stubbing. Yeah. You know
what
I wanted to do, Chris? I don't mean to
Mhm.
interrupt you. I had wanted to, but I just don't want to keep people hanging around. I wanted to go out to my Chinese pistache that's outside my door because I've got a big branch that needs to come off. So I was going to make several incorrect cuts that people tend to want to make, but I think probably I don't need to show. People know what they are. And then I was going to correct all the cuts with cutting at origins. But if anybody wants to hang out, I can do that. But please go on with your questions.
Okay, so Joe's asking, if Joe's still with us here, When thinning for defensible space, which ends up creating ornamentals from native trees on site stock. So you're kind of pruning up, maybe a juniper that may touch the ground, but making kind of a small tree out of it. Is it okay to prune during the summer without causing too much or irreparable damage, drought and insect issues aside? So do you deal with much of that defensible thinning?
Not a lot, but one of the things I might defer to you is that I have always read, and I could be wrong, that conifers are an exception and conifers should be pruned, for instance, like in June. Conifers want to be pruned in the warm weather, not in the cold. So I don't know that I'm adequate to answer that because I might have differing information.
And Joe, I'm going to say it is okay doing it in the summer, and I'm not too sure. I know what I've heard is if a plant is actively growing in what we call the cool season, actually the summer is a good time to prune it because it will actually be dormant.
Yes, and so conifers grow actively when it's cool. And so if you prune them, what do you do when you prune? You stimulate growth. So if you're stimulating new growth in the middle of the cold season, which is what you would do to a conifer, then that new growth is tender, meaning it can get damaged by cold. Now you're opening it up to putting new tender growth on the end. Then you have a hard freeze, and now you're damaging all that tender growth on the ends. So that's a
Right.
real consideration.
And the other thing I have to say to Joe is, if you know any arborists, they have bills to pay 12 months of the year and they want to work 12 months of the year. So yes, you can certainly be pruning. I mean, as homeowners, we can do it ideally during the dormant season, but all of these we can do even during the growing season. Spring's kind of tough on them, but the summer tends to be fine. Just be very attentive to the branch collar. And so you've got clean tools, you're pruning to those branch collars. It's going to minimize any types of disease and problems, issues that you're going to have.
And don't forget, you can go on to arizona.edu/pubs, go into your search bar and simply say pruning conifers. And again, a conifer, conifer, is a term that refers to all things that produce cones. That's your pines, your spruce, your cedars, arborvitae, junipers, those kind of things. So
Right. So
find
Peggy just
it.
asked that question. I don't know if you saw it, but
No, I can't see it.
conifers are the evergreen trees that have needles or scales. They grow a little cone, and I think that was a good description. And so Joe ends up here. It ends up happening during projects, but we may move to adjusting our timing due to droughts and Ips beetle, the bark beetle.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Joe, we might come back and do something specific on defensible space. I definitely
Yeah,
dealing with that. Thank you.
that sounds very interesting.
Moving along here. Okay, Claudia. We got people dropping out, but we got people staying too. So we'll keep it up. Oh, yeah, John, I'm going to go ahead and remove you here. So he did come back and he said he was talking about pruning damage below the collar or tearing the bark. So if you've got a torn bark, there's not much you can do about it. The tree needs to heal itself.
Mhm.
And they often do. Any comments on that?
No, did have somebody that wrote in not too long ago and wanted to know if he should wrap it like in cloth and stuff to try to protect it. I think no, I think it just harbors trouble. I agree
Yeah.
with you. They have a miraculous way of healing themselves. The bark rip is cosmetically unsightly for a while, and they do have to work to repair it. But I think eventually they're fine as long as the bark is not ripped all the way around where it girdles it.
Give the tree the adequate amount of irrigation and it should hopefully be able to take care of itself.
And that's a good point, Chris.
Yeah.
You know, that's the biggest thing is always water your trees thoroughly. That means water it when, especially the mature ones, especially when they're go water them to a depth of at least 3 feet, because a stressed tree is absolutely an invitation. Come on, pests, I need to be removed. Come on, disease. If you keep your tree healthy, just like us, if we stay hydrated, we resist more disease as well. So, and in the winter, keep your watering up, just decrease the amount, the frequency. Never decrease the amount. Always water thoroughly, just decrease your frequency when it gets chilly.
Good.
Sorry, I diverted again.
No, that's it kind of hits, if you want to survive it, you just want to help your tree to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So Claudia asks, how do you know when a tree has normal multiple trunks and when those trunks are not branching properly?
Well, that's a good question because the normal multiple trunk usually kind of show themselves. They're thicker, they're sturdier. And even if a tree has, say, 5 multiple trunks and you think that it looks too busy, you can always, especially in its youth, you can always take off a couple of those trunks, you know, with the pruning we've talked about. And a lot of times too, they'll also develop little wimpy suckery looking trunks and take those off. Some of it, I don't know, Chris, would you say part of it's in the beholder, the eye of the beholder?
I'm going to say, just like you said earlier, know which species you're dealing with and what type of trunk it's supposed to have. So some may be really multiple trunks, and that's how they behave. Others may have had some cold damage or animal damage, and then might be sending up some extra trunks or sprouts that you may not want. So look at those connections. And like Jan was showing the one image that had the tree that had 2 trunks growing together. You know, if you see that when they're young, you can pick one and it will become the central leader. So
and that's different because you can actually see the tissue growing together, where it's actually just a double trunk versus individual trunks that are going to form a multi-trunk tree.
I should have been taking pictures of this Chinese pistache that I grew from a 2-gallon bucket. But I remember at one point it had 2 trunks and I had to pick one side or the other. And now you can't even tell, you know, where it was, but it was just tiny when that happened. And it's also been thinking me of the Vitex.
Mm-hmm.
That Vitex is one of my favorite small trees.
Yeah.
It is fast growing. And it takes a little bit of pruning to train it into the right shape because it can be really bushy. But that's one that you may be getting a lot of those multiple trunks on. But if you look for that central leader, you can kind of shape it while it's young so that it becomes a nice umbrella shape. Okay, moving on to Judith here. Just wondering what we did wrong or didn't do with our front yard ash tree that has bent forward towards bent forward to the street. We never staked it, probably because you never staked it.
Right.
This is an easy thing to happen, and I'm guilty of this myself, where if it's a larger tree, if you're getting actually, say, like a 10-gallon tree and it's got a lot of weight on the top, it's important to stake those properly, the double stake method, because it's got a lot of sail, right? So that sail can get caught in the wind, and then those roots haven't had a chance to get established out beyond the hole that you dug, and it can get pushed to the side. And then once it's growing at an angle, it's going to continue to grow at an angle.
I've always wondered if you could wet the area heavily and then try to stake it and very, very slowly pull the tree back a little. I mean, it's like putting braces on a kid's teeth. Very, very slow, but it makes an eventual difference. And I've always wanted to experiment with that, just gently pulling it back, you know, tying it very tightly, and in another month, go tie it again and keep doing that. It may take a couple of years, but
I think if it's young and that's happened, if it's already been too long and the roots have gone out and got established, I think you're stuck.
yeah.
But if it's still young and that root ball hasn't really gotten out beyond your hole, then I think you're right. You can get in there, loosen up that ball and try to get it straight again, fill up that space. But if you try to bend it, it's just going to create compressed wood, and it's going to spring back. It's not going to work right. Okay, VH is asking, what about Palo Verde rejuvenation cuts? It was cut down to 6 inches.
Ooh.
Let me get my glasses on here. Yeah, that's an inch.
Wow.
I think if you cut a Palo Verde cut down to 6 inches, I think you just killed it.
Yeah, and if it does something, I mean, I have known trees like years ago, I had an Arizona ash. It was a single trunk tree. in fact, how long ago? It was 1978 and the huge freeze of 78. But a huge freeze got it and it froze to the ground. And in the spring, it started up with suckers from nothing and turned into the most gorgeous 8-trunked ash tree you ever saw. Do palo verdes have that capability to produce the suckers? Because if you cut that thing off to 6 inches, he's traumatized. And maybe he'll produce some suckers. And maybe they'll grow into something strong enough and substantial enough. It's worth the try. I don't think it's the rule of success, but I wouldn't discount anything. I don't know what you think, Chris.
You know, and she responds back again about the foothills palo verde as far as the one that she's talking about. So it's just going to depend on, is it a sprouter?
Yeah.
And so if it's a sprouter, you can probably just get reestablished with one of the sprouts and prune out the other sprouts so that you have a main trunk. Otherwise it's multi-branched, but I would say I would pick one of those sprouts and just try to encourage that one to be the tree. And so so give it water. Let's see what it does in the spring. If it sprouts, you got it. If it doesn't, then you replant. Here's something we're going to like, Jan.
Uh-oh.
Irene Matthews is tuning in from Edinburgh. I don't know if we can help at all with Edinburgh, but what time is it? She must not be a sleeper. My rowan, and I'm not even sure what rowan is starting to bud despite the very cold winter. Can she still prune it? My goodness. So what type of weather are you having? This is England, right? Edinburgh, Scotland? Where, excuse me with my geography.
Edinburgh, Scotland, maybe? Is it Scotland?
I can't believe there's something sprouting in January, in February.
Okay, so if you're saying it's starting to bud, but it's already January, it's January, but it's starting to bud, can you still prune? Most people would say if it needs to be pruned, like a lot of people get to their fruit trees late, that it's better to go ahead and get them pruned than not at all. If you're trying to prune for fruit production or you're trying to prune for flower production. So if it's a flower producer, is that tree going to produce in the spring? And if it's a spring producer, you don't want to prune it at all because you're pruning off your flower buds. You want to prune it after it flowers. If it's a fruit producer, you want to go ahead and prune it according to what the tree is. And you got to keep in mind, you have different fruit trees. You have pomes, P-O-M-E. A pome fruit tree is one that has multiple seeds, like an apple or a pear. You know, when you cut an apple and a pear, there are multiple seeds in there, versus a stone fruit that has just one pit, like peach, nectarine, apricot. So pomes need a whole different kind of a pruning than a stone fruit. So that's another whole class. But if you know which way to cut them, it's not too late if they're starting to bud. Because if you don't cut them, you're probably not going to get the fruit production that you hope.
I think that's good advice. And, you know, I hope, I just looked up the rowan, and
I don't
beautiful
know
plant. And, you know, I was just thinking of Mr. Bean, so I was wondering if we're getting a joke, but I'm going to have to say, I think she's giving the right advice. Just like you're saying, it's better to get in there and do it. And Irene says Scotland.
Okay, Edinburgh, Scotland.
Yes. Excuse us, Irene. Thank you. You know how some Americans are. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. John asks, getting a little off the subject, is a treehouse a bad idea?
I don't know what you think, Chris. I've always felt if the tree was old enough, mature enough, and big enough and strong enough, it would take it. But I sure wouldn't build one in a young tree. And if you've got, my thing is if you get up there and start building structure and the branches have any give to them, probably not a good idea. But I don't have experience. I've never built a tree house.
Safety first, John, family first. So put in, you think you got a good, strong tree house, you can always make sure the platform is balanced on the ground. So you got some additional posts, because if you got your kids up on there, you want to be safe. So that's great.
Yeah, that's a great
idea. Yeah, definitely do it. Yeah, treehouse is
supporting posts. Yes. Yes.
Gail, how long should you wait to prune a newly planted tree? You went over that early.
You want a quickie answer?
So yeah, go ahead.
Talking about an ornament, you're talking about just a good old deciduous shade tree. If it has a problem when you plant it young, it's already got crossing branches or it's already got suckers, go ahead and prune it. But if it's just a little tree and you've put it in the ground and your idea is that you want to start taking off the lower branches, don't do that for a year. Let those lower branches stay on your new tree. They're doing nothing but feeding nutrition into your tree to make it stronger, make your trunk larger. It will really pay off.
So you're going to wait 2, 3, even 4 years before you do it, depending on how the shape and how it's growing. It doesn't, you don't need to take them off.
So you can take if you've got branches that are too low to the ground and you don't like them, you can take a few, like 1 or 2 levels of lower branches off after a year has passed. And then maybe the next year, take another little level off. But it will really pay off if you leave those lower branches on for a full year.
I'm going to put in one caveat on that.
Uh-huh.
Because you showed the one picture where people had the flush
Buckeye.
cut.
Uh-huh.
And so I think when those branches on the side start to exceed, say, 2 inches in girth, that's probably, you probably need to take them off, because otherwise that's a big wound.
Okay.
If you wait until they're 3 or 4 inches, you waited way too long. I mean, if it's like at your stomach waist, you know, too low.
Oh yeah. See, I think of like going home and planting a little 5-gallon tree that has little bitty branches coming out the
No,
bottom.
but I was just saying, when you would need to do it is like if they actually get over 1.5 inches, 2 inches, you should be cutting them off.
Oh yes. Yes.
Yeah. But otherwise, if it's still 1 inch diameter, let it
Yeah.
go, because it's just giving strength to that tree. Peggy is asking about a tepu tree. The bark is peeling. What caused and can it heal? She thinks it was sunburn. So sunburn's kind of tough on those things. So I'm always, we were having a conversation about a sunburned tree recently, Jan. What did we
We
decide?
were. He had a sunburn tree, and you can always diagnose sunburn because it happens on the south side of the tree, the side that's facing the south. And we had a fellow who sent one in where his bark had actually split on the south side, because what happens is that it's, with our warm weather and then freezing, it had gotten so warm in the day that everything kind of expanded, and then at night all that expansion froze. And then the next day you've got, it starts to thaw and it warms up, and then everything swells again, and then it split. And I think you and I, Chris, were talking, he wanted to know, the gentleman wanted to know, should he wrap it or paint it with something? Well, A, don't paint it. And B, should you wrap it? Probably not. And so we talked about trees' ability to heal themselves. And most of the time, if you just let it heal, it will. It's either going to heal or it's going to not.
And you may end up with a little bit of what we call a cat face, where it has, lost part of that bark. It's going to heal back to the xylem. And that's okay, because it has the rest of the tree for the highway you called it, for the food and water to move back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure it has some good moisture, saving as many of those branches so that it's shaded to keep the sun off the trunk. That'll help to cut back on it continuing to sunburn and having those problems. So I was even thinking it might even be worthwhile having something on that southwest side to keep that sun off, because that winter sun can just really be tough on some of our trees.
Mm-hmm. It's so moody.
Yeah.
It's so extreme. It's like today we're supposed to hit 80 degrees here, and we were just 20 degrees 2 nights ago. So it's very moody and very extreme.
Okay, I think we have exhausted our questions, Jan. Can you believe it?
I just can't. I thank you all again for your patience and the fact that you hung out, and the fact that many of you even returned after having to cancel this twice. We thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your patience. Yeah, we were getting those storms. I'm going to show some last slides. I want to make sure people have a chance to respond to my survey. Doing the surveys help a lot for what I'm up to, and Jan and I always have to report what we're doing, and this is one of the best ways to show what we do. And
remind people, you've got another class coming up Thursday on planting veggie seedlings.
We do. Let me stop the slides here. I'll bring up my slides and do exactly that. So we just had our Q&A with Jan. There's the link for the webinar evaluation in the chat box. Here's the website down here, extension.arizona.edu/Gila, Gila. And if you go there, you're going to find out what I'm doing in the Garden and Country webinar series going forward. And here's what we're doing. So on Thursday, this is Garden Central this spring. So if you're gardeners, you're going to love this. On Thursday, Rich Johnson, my Gila County Master Gardener, is going to show how he starts his vegetable seedlings. So he's in Payson, about 5,000 feet. This is the time that he starts doing his tomatoes and chilies, and we're going to learn how he does it. He's a marvelous gardener, very successful. So I'm signing in. I'm learning how to do this. Then I'm very happy to be hosting the Payson Community Garden. We have a community garden in Payson, and we've been doing a spring gardening class series for the past 4 or 5 years, and we're hosting it on here on the Garden and Country webinar series. It'll start on February 11. We're going to go all the way to April 15. And our first speaker is going to be Glenn McCombs. If you know Glenn, he's the nurseryman at Plant Fair, the proprietor. Jan, you probably know Glenn.
I don't.
No, okay.
I don't.
Well, Glenn has just been a great businessman and benefactor of the community of Payson, helping people with all their gardening and tree work up there. He's had the Plant Fair, I think, since 1983. So longtime nurseryman up there. He's going to talk about how to wake up your garden. So
that sounds fun.
I think
I'll be there.
Please sign in. I think anybody who gardens is going to love this series. So with that, we're going to close the show down. And thank you everybody for joining us and being part of the show. Stop recording.